One man, however, had a different proposal. Subutai, fresh from his victory over the Jurchid, had been the greatest general in Genghis Khan's army, and with his shrewd knowledge of siege warfare and the use of large attack machines, he had played a major role in every important campaign the Mongols had fought. He was now 60 years old, probably blind in one eye, and according to some reports so fat that he could no longer ride a horse and had to be hauled around in an iron chariot. Despite these physical limitations, his mind was sharp and vigorous, and he was eager to return to war. This is how Jack Weatherford describes Mongol General Sübe'etei in his incredibly popular book Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. This is a consistent part of Sübe'etei's image on the internet and modern popular history. That the most famous of Mongol generals was, ironically, too fat to ride a horse and needed to be hauled around in the 13th century equivalent of a mobility scooter. But where does this description come from? What is our source for it? Well, there isn't one. At least, not directly. Today we're going to look at how a few lines from different historical sources got pulled together into a new, wholly fictional image. Firstly, and most importantly, there is no surviving medieval description of Sübe'etei's appearance or weight. He could have been rather slender and dainty, or a big, beautiful warrior. We have absolutely no idea, and we don't shame him either way. Here's the thing about Sübe'etei. He is mentioned often enough, but as an individual, we know very little about him. The few descriptions are vague and often generic, usually commenting about him being loyal and utterly devoted to the Khans. He appears to have been somewhat callous to human lies, but when the Khan demanded him to spare a city Sübe'etei was hoping to slaughter, then he followed the order to the letter. Largely, it seems he was a very reserved individual, well at home on campaign and unconcerned with politics or administrative matters. His duty was war, and he was good at it. At least at the start of his career, we know he was quite a physically active figure. In 1203, he led an ambush against bandits who had captured his father and their herd of sheep. In 1212, at the start of the war against the Jin dynasty, he was the first to mount the walls on the city of Wonzhou. It was this physical courage, being at the front of danger, that earned him his common epithet, Barter, the brave, the valiant, the knight. From 1211 almost right up until his death in 1248 at the age of 73, Sübe'etei essentially lived on campaign, leading armies across North China, Central Asia, Iran, the Caucasus, the Western Steppes, and Europe. He very rarely wasn't campaigning against someone. Sübe'etei was a soldier's general, who basically bounced across Eurasia like a violent pinball. That alone would make it rather difficult to maintain a rotund physique, or at least be traveling that entire distance and all of those mountain ranges confined to a cart. The source most usually cited for Sübe'etei being a bit husky is a few lines from the Secret History of the Mongols, that most famous chronicle written for the Mongolian royal family in the 13th century. There, Genghis Khan provides Sübe'etei with an iron cart in order to pursue fleeing Merkits, enemies of the Mongols who had fled far across Kazakhstan and reached distant Turkic allies. Sübe'etei is mentioned with an iron cart twice in the Secret History, but the Secret History itself does not describe precisely what an iron cart is, and modern commentators have made all manner of suggestions. One of the most fun is that it was some sort of iron-covered battle cart, like an early tank. Another idea was that it was a mobile forge to smith weapons or tools. The more common assumption people make is that the vehicle had its axles reinforced with iron in some capacity. The idea being stronger axles and frame would make the vehicle better able to survive over the rough terrain. Given that it would be crossing the Altai Mountains and an absolutely massive distance from Mongolia to the Caspian steppes, this is a reasonable assumption. But some people looked at this and thought, an iron-reinforced axle? That must mean it's bearing something very heavy. And what's heavier than an obese person? However, when we look at other sources, we get what these iron carts actually were. The Jami al-Tawarik of the Ilkhanid Vizier Rashid al-Din, written at the very start of the 1300s, indicates specifically that the wheels of the carts were reinforced with iron spikes, so that they would not break while traveling over rocks. The Shengwu Qinzheng similarly describes it as iron-shod wheels. The Secret History and the relevant sections of the Jami al-Tawarik and the Shengwu Qinzheng all relied on the same, now lost body of Mongolian sources, and we can expect that the meaning of the secret history is intended to have been the same as these other sources. So it's rather simple then. It was just the wheels of these carts which were reinforced to better survive the long journey. Sübe'etei and Jochi spent some 2 years on campaign, crossing Kazakhstan and back, and required strong carts. Professor Atwood suggests these were large carts which bore tents and living quarters on them, and thus were carrying a great weight. This was not a lightning raid, but a methodical campaign to finish off the last of the Merkit. Of course, the secret history of the Mongols is now far easier to find a translation of, and at first glance seems superior to these seemingly more obscure Chinese and Persian sources. Someone not very familiar with Mongol history could be forgiven for only consulting the secret history's version of events, as I suspect most adherents to the round Subutai theory do. But with a bit of textual comparison and historical context, this iron cart is not terribly mysterious. But if that's the matter of the carts, where do these other details of the obese Sübe'etei come from? Stephen Pao and Jingjing Lao, in their article Subutai, Sorting Fact from Fiction, offer an explanation. Rashiduddin has 2 descriptions which may have been an influence. One is a reference to a relation of Sübe'etei who was old and needed to be moved around in a cart, not on account of his weight, but age. Rashid also describes Konichi, a great-grandson of Jochi, as being so fat that no horse could carry him, and he also had to be transported in a cart. His guards apparently needed to watch over him in his sleep to ensure he did not suffocate. This is probably helped along by the well-attested tendency of many Mongol princes and generals to have become rather out of shape and gouty. These details were added to Sübe'etei's myth by less scrupulous scholars simply looking for something to say about Sübe'etei, who otherwise is a rather murky figure. And the Iron Cart episode in the Secret History of the Mongols appeared to be indirect evidence for it. This is hardly the only example of authors taking details from other individuals and adding them to Sübe'etei. Pao and Lao note several of these in their article. Again, we have so little information on Sübe'etei as an individual, to the frustration of many an author. This is why I stress the importance of going back to the primary sources, and not just accepting claims on the internet, popular, and scholarly literature if they cannot be backed up from the medieval accounts. If it can't be found in them, then it is a fabricated detail. Perhaps Sübe'etei actually was a heavier set man who was restricted to a cart in his later years. Perhaps he was very slim, but we don't know. It's unrecorded, and essentially you can leave it to your imagination. But understand the difference between artistic license and what's actually recorded by historical sources, and what other people have repeated without bothering to see where it came from. There will, I suppose, be a lot more videos on all of these popular myths about Sübe'etei, so subscribe and you can listen to me poke more holes in all of your favorite stories about the Mongol Empire.